Welcome back. In the last lesson, we studied some basic concepts that are needed to continue with our course. Specifically, we learned how to return multiple or single values in a synchronous or asynchronous way, but also we went through two different programming models, the pull and the push model. And we were almost able to complete this table, but we're missing single spot. What happens when we want to use the push programming model and have some kind of artifact that can return not a single value, but multiple values? We don't have that yet, which is exactly why I want to present this new concept, observable. What is an observable? It says that it represents a stream of source of data that can arrive over time. Sounds awesome, right? And probably even interesting, but I think it's like too raw of an explanation. I'm going to try to make it easier to understand. So let's read the definition again. It basically says that it's a stream or source of data that can arrive over time. And I want to represent that in a diagram. If you look at this diagram, the inner line is going to represent the timeline. And the time in this case is going to flow from left to right. So what about the little circles? The little circles are going to represent the different values that are going to be emitted by the observable over that timeline. And then this little vertical line at the end represents that the observable completed successfully. So now with this diagram, we have a visual way to represent the definition of what an observable is. And this is not something that I just invented. In fact, the ReactX team created this diagram to help people understand how to deal with reactive concepts. And this, in fact, is actually called a marble diagram. Now that you're kind of familiar with the representation of an observable, let me show you two different variations of how this diagram will look like depending on if the observable it is finite or infinite. Like for example, in this case, there's no vertical line in the end, which means that this observable is infinite. That is something that we're going to discuss in more details later. I just wanted to show you now that when you don't see that vertical line at the end, it means that there's no end to this observable. And the other thing that you might see when dealing with this marble diagram is this X. Whenever you see an X, it actually represents an error that was emitted by the observable, indicated that for whatever reason, there is an abnormal termination. After this quick introduction, you probably have an idea of what is an observable, but I think it will make more sense if you start writing some code. So let's switch really quick to start creating some observables. Okay, let's switch to Chrome and let's go to this website right here, https://stackblitz.com. Now, instead of use Visual Studio Code for this lesson, we're going to use this online IDE, which I think is pretty cool. Probably you're going to like it too. I already have an account with them, but I want to show you how to use it if you don't have an account. I highly suggest you to sign in with your GitHub credentials, which allows you to create your own GitHub repository directly from this online IDE. But in case you don't want to do that, you can also go here and click Start a New App. And from here, select the RxJS TypeScript option. Click on it, and this is going to open an online version of Visual Studio Code, which is pretty cool. If you got this page, you're ready to follow along. And now, I don't know if you really sign in or not, but let me sign in because I want to use a repo that I already have here. So if I refresh this page, it just says Hola QP, and then I'm going to use the agency XJS repository. Okay, here we are. Okay, I should have the same content that you have, newly created project. For now, we're not going to use any of this. So let me get rid of all of that. And we are going to replace the import of by import observable. Okay, good. Most of the time, we're going to be creating observables out of events. But in this case, because we are just learning, we're going to create one directly from scratch using the observable constructor. So let's define a new observable here. This is how we do it. Let's define constant, and here we're going to do observable, and observable receive a single parameter, which is a subscriber. Subscriber is of type subscriber. This we also have to import from RxJS package, right? And then subscriber takes a generic argument. In this case, our subscriber is going to be of type number. Oh, sorry, number. Okay, here we are. We just create an observable. Of course, it does nothing, but this is the syntax that you follow to create an observable from scratch. Basically, a constructor that the only thing that it takes is a callback with a subscriber parameter. And remember, the subscriber takes a generic argument. Let me bring the definition of an observable up here. And also, let's try to reproduce what we did in the introduction, right? This is more or less like a marble diagram. So 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, right? And it ends here. This is more or less what we show in the marble diagram when we were doing the introduction. Now let's try to mimic this using the actual code. So the first thing that you need to know is that everything that you do inside this observable is done through a subscriber. The subscriber has three main methods. Let me show you. Subscriber. We have the next method. We have the error method. And we have the completed method or complete method. You use the next method to emit values. So if you want to emit the number 20 or number 30, you would pass that value to the next method. If by any chance there is an error when you are dealing with your observable, you would call the error method. And also remember when I mentioned that there are observables that are infinite and the ones that are not. So whenever your observable is not infinite, you would call the complete method. Okay, for now, our observable, it is finite and also is emitting 5 values. So let's try to reproduce that. Start here. So let's get rid of the error for now. And let's start emitting values. 20. Forget about the timeline. You know how they are a little bit more separate than others. For now, let's just emit them all at the same time. 60 and 80. And we complete here, right? So now also let's show some console message, shall we? Console log starting, right? Let's copy this. Ending, right? So if we save this and we go back to the console, let's clear the console, refresh. Okay, the page refreshed, but none of the messages that we put here in the console log got executed. So why is that? The reason why we did not get any console log output into in our console is because observables are called. What that means is that they are not going to do anything unless you subscribe to them. Which is why this class is called subscriber. It makes sense, right? So how do you subscribe to an observable? Very easy. You have to do that. So you basically call the subscribe method. The subscribe method is going to accept a function that is going to receive a value, the value of your observable. In this case, let's call it x. And from here, let's print it out. So console log. And there we go. We got our starting message, all the values that we emitted, and the ending value. So what is really going on when we subscribe to an observable? And in order to explain that, I'm going to use this nice analogy that we have from the Learn RxJS site. It says that subscriptions are what set everything in motion. You can think of this like a faucet. You have a stream of water ready to be tapped, which in this case is the observable, then someone just needs to turn the handle. In this case of observables, that roles belong to a subscriber. So this is what's going on here. The subscribe method receives this function, which is also known as the observer. This function gets called every time somebody emits a value from within the observable. In this case, remember, the way that we emit values is by running these next methods that we have right here. And let me make this bigger. Okay, that's much better. So every time we call the next method inside an observable, and we actually calling the function that we pass to the subscribe method. Most of the time, this is how we're going to subscribe to an observable. But there's also another method. And probably, if you recall the following names from the previous explanation, you can also do the following. Pass an object, and then pass the following. If you recall, from my initial explanation, I said that inside an observer, from a subscriber, you can call mainly three different methods. The next method, the error method, and the complete method. And as you can see, the object that we pass have the same property names. So it's easy to remember, right? Again, most of the time, you're going to be using this form, because you're going to be subscribing using a function, not this object. But it is good to know. And in some cases, it's very useful. For now, I'm just going to get rid of it because we don't need it. Another key aspect to remember when subscribing to observables is that every time that you call subscribe, a new execution context is created. And let me show you. If we duplicate this line here, we save this. Let's refresh it again. There we go. Now we got two identical outputs. This is from the first observable, and this is from the second one. So which means that every time we call subscribe, this code right here gets executed independently for the subscription call. Nothing that you do on the second subscription is going to affect the first one, or vice versa. This is just a one-side conversation, which is also known as unicast. By default, observables work in an unicast way. It's a one-to-one relationship. If you want to work on one observer having multiple listeners, then we will have to use subject, which is something I'm going to explain later on. Okay, up to this point, even when we are using like observables, we said that they're kind of a stream of data that can emit values over time. All the code that we have here, it gets executed synchronously. And I did it on purpose to show you that the fact that you're using observable doesn't mean that you're using or you are doing asynchronous programming, because everything you've seen here gets executed synchronously. And let me show you. Let me get rid of this. Let's add a console log. And, right? Let's get rid of this already. We already know what happened inside when we call subscribe. So now, let's save this, clear the console, refresh. And actually, let me hide this to have more space. Okay, so now we saw that 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 are displayed before the end text, which is something that we put all the way at the end here, right? Which means that this code here and everything else up here got executed synchronously because all the outputs were there before the end. Hopefully that makes sense. But now, what really makes observables really interesting is the ability to emit values over time. And let's make a test right here. Let's say that the value 30, we want to emit it 2 seconds after, right? So how can we do that? Let's use a simple set timeout. Probably some of you love the set timeout. Okay, so let's copy this here. Let's put it here and let's say that this is going to happen let's say 1 second. 1 second after, right? Now, if we execute this, let's clear the console and refresh again. This is what we're going to have. Nothing. We're actually losing the value number 30. It's not printed out. So why is that? The reason why we're not getting this value is because the observable respects its contract. And as you can see, we emit like value 20, 40, 60, 80. But what do we do after that? We execute subscriber complete. We're saying that at this point, this observable is done and it should not emit any more values. Does it make sense? Let's see it work in any case. Let's comment this out, clear this, refresh. Okay, this that is from the previous. Let's clear it again, refresh. And there we go. We have the value 30 1 second after we emitted the other values. And as you can see, this text was printed after the end message that we printed at the end of the code here. Now that we have a basic understanding on how to create observables from scratch, let's explore different ways and probably more useful ways in which you can use observables. For this, let's switch back to the index.html and create a button here. And let's say the ID for this button is button 1, right? Button 1. So let's expand this, and here we are. We have button 1 here. So in the beginning, I said that you can create observables using the constructor, but also you can create it using the create method that I mentioned, but we never did it. Let's do it really quick here. If I duplicate this line and change this to create and remove the new, this has exactly the same effect that if you were creating the observable using the constructor. Those are the very primitive way of creating observables. But now let's add some creation functions to the mix. And what we're going to start using right now is something called from event. Okay, so how can we use this function to create an observable? By the way, you can create an observable pretty much out of anything, and we're going to explore some options now. Let's create a reference to the button that we just added, and let's do it here. Const button document get element by ID. If you're not familiar with this, basically what I'm trying to do here is get a reference to the button that we put on the screen. Remember that we added an ID of button 1, so I'm trying to use that button 1 text to reference the element. So at this point I should have a button reference here in this variable. So now in order to create an observable out of, let's say, click events of this button, we could do something like this. Click observable, for example. We can use the creator function from event. It requires two parameters. The first one is the reference to the button, and the other one is the event. In this case, the event is the click event. So at this point, we have an observable in this variable. But remember, nothing happens with an observable unless we subscribe to it. So let's do that. Click observable, subscribe, let's call event, and let's print it out to the console. Let's log event. So if we save this and we start clicking here, there we go. So what just happened? By calling this function here and passing a reference to the button element and this click string, what we're doing here is basically creating an event listener to that button and putting all of that inside an observable. So every time the user clicks on it, we call the subscriber to the observable. Okay, but what about if we want to create an observable out of, let's say, an array, right? Let's say we have array of 1, 2, 3, right? I want to create an observable. So there's also a very convenient function that we can use that is actually called from. From here, you can do our observable, and we can do from array. And again, if we do our observable, subscribe, subscribe. Let's say this is X and we print X. Save this. What are we going to get? 1, 2, 3 from this array and everything else that we printed before. All of these are typical examples on how to create an observable and subscribe to them. But what about when we do not want to listen anymore for observable changes? What do we do? In order to do that, let's clean this code here and let's just leave this one. Okay? We have the reference to the button. We create an observable out of the click event and we print the event information once the user clicks on it, right? Let's save this, clear the console, refresh, and let's try it again. Perfect. Keep working, right? But what happens if I only want to listen to 3 clicks, or I only want to be listening to click event for 10 seconds or 1 minute? How can I stop that? And that is exactly what the return value of the subscribe function gives us. It's actually called a subscription. So if we do this, subscription, right? Okay, and let's hide this. Now we have here a subscription. What can we do with this subscription? Let's see it really quick. Subscription that. We can do a few things, but most of the time, and what I'm going to show you right now, is the unsubscribe method. When you run the unsubscribe method, you stop listening for changes in your observable. Let me show you. Let's add another set timeout. I'm just going to use the subscription unsubscribe after 3 seconds, right? We're gonna save this, we're gonna close this, click, 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 click. What happened? We stopped listening. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. After 3 seconds, I call the subscription unsubscribe method, and now we are not listening anymore for click events. I highly recommend that you unsubscribe from all your observables. It is a really good practice, and we can avoid with that memory leaks. Of course, that's going to make way more sense when we start using operators, which we're going to be doing in the next lesson. I will see you there.